Hello. I'm very happy to welcome all of you here to our online panel discussion today. And before I start with a brief introduction, let me give you some technical information. This discussion will be held in Belarusian and English, and we have simultaneous interpretation. Thanks to Ales Lavinets and Veronika Mazurkiewicz. So thanks a lot to our interpreters. And the languages can be selected using the globe icon on the bottom bar of the screen. So please have a look. You will find this globe on the bottom of your screen. And you will also find further information in the chat. And very important for all of you, this event will be recorded and published on our YouTube channel. So please keep that in mind. This discussion is organized by the Forum for Historical Research in Belarus, and for any potential newcomers here who have not attended previous events, let me briefly introduce the forum to us. It is run by the German Association for East European Studies, DGO, based here in Berlin, and it is financed by the German Academic Exchange Service. It is a platform for exchange on Belarusian history in its transnational context, and our partners are historians from Belarus who had to leave the country after the protests of 2020 and who now live in Germany, in Poland, in Lithuania, the Czech Republic, and other countries. But we are also eager to reach out to critically minded historians who are still in Belarus. And of course, we also reach out and historians participate, historians from Germany and other countries who have a special focus on the history of Belarus. So we are also an international, transnational platform. So what do we do and what does the forum offer? It offers safe space for exchange among scholars at risk. We offer short-term scholarships for young researchers, and we organize public events like conferences, but also like this online discussion today. We are very lucky to have a steering group that supports our forum. You may know some of our members: Felix Ackermann, Tatiana, Irina Castellan, Simon Lewis, Viktor Shadursky, and Annika Walke. And our topic today is Belarus 2020 and beyond, revisiting events through an academic lens. As you all know, there have been a lot of events over the last months dedicated to the protests in 2020 and the aftermath. We ourselves, DGO, has organized a public event last Friday here in Berlin, together with other partners, and we then took a look at the events from the political perspective, from the societal perspective, from the perspective of artists, of authors, songwriters. But the protests also sparked huge academic interest among various disciplines, among sociologists, people from political science, history, anthropology, and other related fields. And therefore, our today's discussion focuses on the current state of research on the events of 2020. And I think this is very interesting and also very, very topical and new. We want to learn more about the questions researchers continue to explore regarding the events of 2020, about the data and other sources that current research is based on. We will take a look at topics, at voices that are highlighted, and we will also try to explore the white spots, meaning the topics and voices that are still missing. Our moderator today is Alena Aharelysheva. Alena is a Belarusian sociologist and gender expert. She holds a master's degree in sociology from the European University in Vilnius. She works with various national and international NGOs, has served as a research fellow at the Belarusian Academy of Sciences, has worked as national gender consultant for UNICEF, and as coordinator of the LGBTQ Community Center in Minsk. And Alena co-founded the feminist group Belarus that advocates for gender equality and women's rights. And previously, she led the gender studies at the European College of Liberal Arts, E-Club in Belarus. So I'm really looking forward to an interesting discussion. And Alena, with this, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabi. Так, ми починаємо нашу дискусію. Спочатку
And we start our discussion. We will have three speakers. And first, I will ask questions. They will lay the context, and after that, there would be Q&A session. And also, I will answer questions. And I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is Tatiana Shchyttsova.
And Tatiana is a researcher in Belarusian anti-authoritarian community that appeared in Belarus in 2020. So, Tatiana, can you tell us more about Belarusian anti-authoritarian community? What is that? Maybe you come across other researchers who also studied this topic. It will be interesting for us to hear about that, please. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to this conversation, to this forum. And I want to highlight an important role of the forum in the support of Belarusian scientists and research around Belarusian culture and history. So I'm very grateful for your work. And now the question. Yes, I would like to focus on two major thesis so that I could describe the community that appeared in 2020, that was created in 2020. So I've been developing those ideas in my book. I wrote a book in Russian, and recently there was a translation into English published, and this book is about 2020. So the first study is that this is a new community, a new collective object that appeared based on ethical basement. So this ethical idea, ethical basement, is very important for understanding this new community that was created, that appeared in 2020. On the surface, this ethical basement is connected with the inacceptability of violence and a political structure where violence is possible. It is against this model of the policy. The solidarity that we could witness in 2020 and after 2020, it's not only political solidarity, it's ethical political solidarity, which means, well, what's the implication of that? It means that this mass solidarity, it meant that the state should be based on law, constitution, based on law, and also on values, in particular the value of human life. The law should be not just random law. The basic law for the country should be also reflecting the base value of the human life and dignity. You can call that human rights. So I would like to highlight this again. What motivated people to protest massively? This was not only the political idea about unfair elections or that the votes were not counted the right way, but also this particular feeling for the victims of violence and the violence against similar people. So it was solidarity. And I think many people repeat, and I saw the witnesses saying it was impossible not to go out, not to protest. I interviewed many people, and many of them say it was just not possible not to join. If the authorities do that to your neighbors, to people around you. So we have academic lens to look at this issue today. We have an academic frame of discussion. And when we see this from the philosophical perspective, when we try to interpret this phrase from the philosophical perspective, we can understand that it's a new understanding of objectivity. So when we analyze it, we can see that this is not the object that is completely autonomous. It's not about individualism. It's something else. I will explain it later. And the principles of coexistence of people in community are a bit different. So the subject is vulnerable. And for this subject, a moral issue is already presupposes that this person feels very well sufferings of other people. So Kant's moral law and his phrase that moral law is inside me, the experience of 2020 shows that we need to think over the actor perspective. It's not the actor like Kant described it, because the moral law was not inside the actor. It was not moral law was between the actors. So if I am suffering and I see that other people are suffering, if other people are suffering, it also concerns me because I'm part of it. So this being involved motivates me to protest. And I will sum it up. The ethical basement of the protests. Mass protests in 2020 show that we are not singular actors, but we share basic values. And in my book, I offered a term that exists in Belarusian language that shows this new, illustrates this new paradigm, how we can understand interdependence between actors. So this word is szanować, and it has German roots. So appreciate. Szanować is both appreciate and be careful. Be careful about the life of other people, about the environment, and also respect the person or the environment. So when we united, then we are over the Kant dualism when we understand a moral actor. There are other philosophers whom we could quote to understand this experience. Mark Schiller in German tradition, Waldenfels also in German philosophical tradition, Bakhtin. Yes, it's a well-known thinker from Russia. So that was my first point, and I will be a bit shorter about my second one. first one about the ethical basement, and second, a peculiarity of our community after 2020 is that it's not a homogeneous community. It wasn't homogeneous in understanding a national identity, for example. Not everyone understood it in the same way, or not everyone belonged to the same political party. Our community was heterogeneous, and there are many articles and publications that show sociological picture of this community. It was really quite heterogeneous, even from the sociological point of view. The groups were very different, and this heterogeneous community was done through horizontal, was developed through horizontal interconnection. And in political way, it's very important that it was performing without any central coordination. And this is a very important and ambivalent moment. So you can see it from a different perspective. Why? Because on the one hand, from the point of view of protest movements and transformations in the society or political science, we can say that the absence of strategic center for the protest was lowering the chances to change the regime. This is one side, but there is another side which focuses on the specific features of this political potential of a new community as heterogeneous community. We could witness that this community was able to self-organize locally through local groups, through internet chats and communities. So we could witness that this form of community, it appears, well, the society showed itself as the community of communities. So solidarity through community of communities. But it was not connected with any central position of the government. And there is a huge philosophical and political meaning in that. Our practice of protest showed that there is a potential of political organization of a polycentrical republic. So I want to introduce this concept for our discussion, polycentrical republic, and it is a meaningful alternative for sovereignty. A sovereignty principle appeared in European political tradition back in Gobst times. So this principle is the core of modern states. Authoritarian states show us that they show us a very anti-humanitarian form of political order based on principle of sovereignty. That's why, well, to sum up, I'd like to say that when I describe our community as anti-authoritarian, I mean that it doesn't mean simply that there were many people who were against Lukashenko's authoritarian regime. Yes, it is true, but it's not the full truth. When we add to that the philosophical perspective, political theory perspective, we should also add that this anti-authoritarian community means that we talk about demonstration of perspective and of the alternative model of state. This is what we brought up through the 2020 protest and afterwards, because the practices of solidarity continued after 2020 and they still continue. I want to mention several books because you asked me about publications. Yes, there were many articles, academic articles in many disciplines that describe the protest in 2020. I will not name particular articles, but I will list some books, monographies that there are not so many of them, but they are interesting to read and to discuss. A book by Pavel Barkowski and Andrzej Gniazdowski, a Polish-Belarusian, a book which is called Revival of Belarus. They compare Polish solidarity experience with Belarusian solidarity experience. Olga Szparaga's book, Revolution Has a Female Face, and it's clear by the title that the book focuses on the role of the female leadership, female subject actor, a female as an actor. And Kirschbaum's book, The Revolution of Passions. It's a very interesting name and it's a very interesting book. So all three books that I've mentioned, they focus on the analysis of our political experience of solidarity. So this is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, please. Thank you, Tatiana, for this very good start for our discussion. And I will, I think, two of the three of the books that you've mentioned, they are also available in German. Olga Szparaga's book is available in German. And we are going to turn to a more global issue. What is a Belarusian community in 2020? So we get narrower to the role of music in the Belarusian protest.
He is a professor of international politics at the University of Leuven in Belgium, and his research focused on the memory, democratization, and the protest movement in the Central and Eastern Europe. And now he wrote also a book about the role of music in pro-democracy protest in Belarus in 2020. So Peter, could you tell us a bit more about your book and about how you define the role of music in Belarusian protest in 2020? And also if there are any publications and studies about the music in Belarusian protest and the role of music also, that will be good if you mention this. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and hello everyone. It's really nice to be here in this virtual space and talk about Belarus. I'm coming from the perspective of an observer in Belgium. Belgium, Belarus, it's an alliteration between the two country names that has always intrigued me, but this is obviously a coincidence. I'm intrigued as a scholar of East European politics by the events of 2020 and everything that followed. And one of my ambitions has been to talk to an audience in Belgium and the Netherlands about these events, because something is known about it, but not enough, I think. So it's a bit of my mission to talk about it and to explain, but also to give voice to a lot of Belarusians, activists, in particular also artists, musicians, visual artists, people I admire for the work that they are doing in sometimes very difficult circumstances in diaspora outside of the country where they were born, and also far away sometimes from family and friends. Now, to the theme of music, if we look back to the protests of 2020, 2021, one of the things that was really striking as a feature is how central music was in the entire pro-democracy mobilization. So you could say that this is an ethical protest, but it's also a cultural protest. These were not only political demonstrations, they were really cultural events that made them also very powerful. And throughout those months, you could see, even from afar, from, in Belgium, on the computer screen, on television, you could hear and you could see that many musicians across various genres were active in the protests alongside protesters. And this was going from singing in a choir, singing in rock bands, folk music collectives, amateur performers. It was really not simply a soundtrack or background noise. They really shaped, I think, the mood, the symbolism, the emotional grammar of the protests. And looking at these musicians and hearing the music, I was intrigued by the meaning, all of the meanings that had become attached to some of these musical chants and refrains that kept coming back. And I noticed that the movement, which is a community of communities, indeed, drew also on a historical background. So there's a long musical lineage here that you could see in the protests. And one example is a song that I knew from Poland, because I lived in Poland in the 1990s. And one song that reminded me and was sung during the protests of Poland in the 1990s and the 1980s was Mury, a song that was made famous by a Polish singer, Jacek Kaczmarski, in the early 1980s in the Solidarność movement. And many people in Poland know it as a solidarity anthem, but it has even deeper roots. It goes back to a Catalan song sung in Spain. And then other songs intrigued me because they had a different history. A very famous rock song, for example, that was really prominent in the protests was the Belarusian rock song from early 2000s, Tri Czarapachy, which also sort of got a new meaning in the protests, originally sung by Javan Wolski. And you could hear the crowd singing it in 2020, and it felt like a new song specifically made for the occasion. And finally, also, to just give a third example, one song that also struck very much and that I was intrigued by is the Peremien song, the famous Victor Tsoi song, Soviet rock, you could say, from the 1980s, very different time. But also that seems to have been a song that connected generations and made a community of communities, indeed, linking, let's say, the changes of the 1980s to the changes in more recent times. And so you have this layering of musical references. And for me, it showed really two things. As an external observer, it really showed two things. First, it showed that Belarus had a vibrant, and still has a vibrant, popular musical culture. One that many people in Western Europe simply had not noticed before 2020, that music became, in a way, a gateway for international audience to pay closer attention to Belarus, to its art scene more broadly, to creativity, to other cultural elements in political protests, such as humor and comedy, such as poetry. So that's one thing, unlocking maybe Belarus to an international audience. And I know that a lot of people look back at the protests as somehow failed and being cracked down by the regime and so on, and ended up in tragedy. But in a way, it also succeeded in putting Belarusian culture more on the map internationally. So it also had this particular success, you could say. And the second element in this layering of musical references that I think is important is that not only for Belarus, but in general, I think the fact that there were so many cultural aspects and music primarily as a result of that, that revealed to me the extent to which authoritarian politics is not only about an attack on institutions or an attack on elections, it is also an attack on everyday cultural life among the population. The protests continue, and the regime started to target really deliberately the artists, the musicians, with remarkable intensity. Many bands were banned from performing, people were arrested, some artists were detained, sent to prison, pushed into exile. In the book that I've written for the Belgian Dutch audience, I do a portrait of one particular band, Irdorat, a folk music band, who performed this Peremien song on bagpipes, which I find already kind of an interesting combination of traditional folk music and rock music. So in terms of musical experimentation, it was already something valuable. But they were arrested for playing these bagpipes and drums on the street. And their imprisonment, I think, shows how cultural expression itself had become dangerous under authoritarianism and the target of authoritarianism. So for me, this is one of the strongest illustrations in recent times of why the arts and the humanities and everything that is an expression of our cultural and creative freedom, why it matters. In moments of crisis, it seems that when a regime is threatened, it goes after the artists really very quickly. Maybe first, it censors literature, it forbids certain songs, it tries to silence those who articulate a different emotional horizon. And the protests 5 years ago made that brutally clear, not only, I think, for Belarusian people, but for external observers like myself, for an international audience who were paying attention at the time. It made that painfully clear. And as for research that you're asking, there's, I think, now an emerging, although still relatively small, international academic, but also journalistic and literature on the musical dimensions of the Belarusian protests. I know many scholars who are interested in this, who are working on protest music, on cultural resistance, and on Eastern European popular culture, let's say, and they've started to analyze these events and they take it, give it quite substantial attention. And some studies look at the repertoire of the songs and how songs can actually mobilize people and be an expression when people are not allowed to have a voice. But others look also at musicians sustaining collective identity, which is extremely important also in the Belarusian case now, I think. Culture keeps, in a way, the community of communities alive outside and connected outside of Belarus. And so one of the, you're asking for examples, and I could give many, but maybe I'm going to highlight the recent issue that has been put out by the magazine Baltic Worlds, which is freely available online and deals specifically with all kinds of music as political protest. and also music used by the states in authoritarian regimes. So there's an opposite side too, of course. I mean, it's not only that music is used only in a search for freedom. It's sometimes used by regimes also in their attempt to oppress the population. So that battle between these forms of cultural expression and appropriation of culture is, I think, now a growing field of interest among scholars. And the recent issue of Baltic Worlds talks quite a bit about that and has a range of authors showing you different case studies of how music is a part of protest culture in Central and Eastern Europe. So the field is growing, I think, but there's definitely room for further work. And I'm looking forward to writing more about it and getting to know more about it. I think I'll stop here for the moment, and if there are questions, I'm happy to engage in further thoughts about this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. That was very interesting, and I'm really sure that we will continue this discussion later on. But now, actually, I like how one topic continue by the other topics, and you mentioned that Belarus has lots of the musicians, authors, poets, etc. And actually now we are moving to our next speaker, Hanna Komar. Hanna, it's actually the modern Belarusian poet. She's also a writer and translator, and now she's doing her PhD at the University of Brighton, and she's exploring the topic of her PhD. It's how the poetry can give the voice to Belarusians women's experience, and in terms of the domestic violence and the state abuse. And my question to Hanna actually about this dimensions and differences and similarities between state violence and domestic violence, and how you analyze it through your poetry perspective. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, hello everyone. I'm a poet, or I broadly call myself a storyteller because I've also written nonfiction, a nonfiction book about Belarusian events. And actually doing a doctoral thesis, doctoral research was an unexpected step for me. That's why I was particularly happy and relieved, because I imagined before I started doing the PhD, before I found autoethnography, that's my method, which I will talk about soon. So before I found autoethnography, I thought that academic writing is something very dry, very depersonalized, very rational, and that was not something I could ever do well. So then I found autoethnography. And autoethnography is a relatively new method in academic research. It appeared in the mid-1970s and then developed through the 1980s and early 2000s. And it was a response to exactly this kind of academia where there is a cult of the rational, and the emotional, anything to do with emotions and feelings is considered wrong and inappropriate, and there is this divide between personal is excluded, the emotion is excluded, the research is written out of the research. So autoethnography actually, and autoethnographers state that the personal experience is valid experience, and it can be a starting point to explore, describe, and interpret cultural texts, experiences, beliefs, and practices. And that's what I do. The title in progress, at least, of my research is Using Poetry to Share Belarusian Women's Experiences of Gender-Based Violence and Patriarchy. But basically what I do, I have lived experience of domestic abuse as a child, and then a state violence in 2020 in Belarus. And so I use personal and familial experience of domestic violence to connect, to like draw parallels, connections, and interconnections between domestic and state violence. And I say and show, like, this is what tyranny looked like in my home, and this is what the tyranny looks like at the state level. And I show how they're the same, basically, how the mechanism behind them the same control, the same, like keeping people in fear, a fear of punishment, coercion, manipulation, gaslighting, all those mechanisms are the same. And I also show how we can resist both in the same or in similar ways. And this is also a poetic autoethnography. Well, my entire method is called feminist familial poetic autoethnography. It's a very long one, but what does it mean that it's poetic? It means that poetry here is included at different levels and in different ways, because usually what happens is poetry is for literary studies, and then these kind of events, analyzing them, is for social, political, historic studies, etc. And I combine both. And for example, I use poetry, a quote poetry that reflects on the events of 2020, but not just that, which reflects and shows how violence is ingrained in our state system and our cultural system, and in history. And I quote poets like Valzhina Mort, Yulia Timofeeva, Kristina Bandurina, Volga Zlotnikova, who have been writing about these things. And I write my own poetry as well. And that's where that's the most revelational part, because another focus of this research is on mother and daughter relationship and how those relationships are affected by violence, both patriarchal violence and by domestic violence. Because in the process of doing the ethical approval, receiving ethical approval to interview my mom and my sister, I read a lot of feminist literature. And I came to realize that the way we view our mothers and treat them is shaped by patriarchy. So we view our mothers through the male gaze, and we expect from them to be perfect from our point of view, of course, which means to do the right thing that's right in our opinion. And they don't have the right for a mistake, but also we don't give them the rights sometimes, very often, to be themselves. We forget, and we don't see them as individual human beings with their own stories, with their own experiences, with their own needs and regrets and dreams. We see them as our mothers who owe us to be this and this and this. And also there is a thing that is specific for domestic violence called maternal alienation. It is this, it's a concept. So when an abuser, and it happens again both at the family level and at the bigger level, yeah. But speaking of families, when the abuser uses these tactics, when he blames the woman, the mother, for everything. So he makes himself into a victim, and the woman then becomes responsible for everything that he is doing. It becomes her fault. And the children, whether they want it or not, even if they're on their mother's side, if it lasts, the longer it lasts, the higher the chances that they will adopt, that they will start blaming their mother too, for different things, like, why haven't you left him? Why didn't you protect us? Couldn't you keep silent when you needed to? Why did you argue with him? So there are a lot of things. And even still as grown-up, who may keep some of that blame. And when I realized that I have that too, I at least decided first in my research to adopt this feminist optics and treat my mother with respect and love, and see her for an individual human being she is, which means listen to her stories. Listening to people's stories actually really, really helps us to see them for who they are, rather than project our own expectations on them. And my point was, okay, I will listen to my mother with respect, and then I will I was hoping to uncover the kind of love and affection that I felt were buried under this blame and shame and anger. And I've been my mother's stories and experiences and our shared experience and these layers of experience have been like inspiring me to write poems. And I noticed that those poems, they were actually full of love. And the writing, the creative writing, became this space where we kind of met with my mother, although we cannot really physically meet, yeah, because she lives far away and I cannot come. But we can meet in that space from the place of love and respect and understanding. And I was amazed, and I still am, at how this has actually been changing my actual relationship with my mother. How I've become kinder, I've become more caring, and how I've actually finally been able to express all that love that I feel for her. And I stopped blaming her. Sorry, I can talk about this forever, but that's about the role of creative writing, yeah, in telling those stories about violence, because well, they're quite harsh. There is a lot of pain there, but we can find, yeah, peace, and we can kind of change the way we see our past, and as a result our present and our future through writing about those experience, with this kind of feminist, this very caring lens. And yeah, that's probably mostly what I wanted to say for now.
Thank you so much, Hanna, for this very touchy and personal speech. And now I'm just checking, do we have any questions regarding to our speakers? I didn't see any of them, but I just remind our dear audience, please don't hesitate to ask questions if you have some. So I will probably start it myself. So моє перше питання буде до Тетяни Shchyttsovой.
The first question is to Tatiana Shchyttsova about your point about the anti-authoritarian community. Well, 5 years after, what changes do you see in Belarusian community 5 years after 2020? Is it totally destroyed? Has it taken a different form? Is it still existent, or do we have multiple communities that should be studied separately? Do you have any ideas? Can you share? Yes, thank you for the question. It's very difficult to reply. It can be a topic for a separate discussion, I think. But to put it short, how much time do you have? Well, 5-7 minutes. Good, then. How does it continue our community of communities? First of all, this ethical component, the practice of solidarity that show how people adhere to this principle of being careful and respectful. And I think that, well, we can be sure that the ethos, the way of life of the community that appeared in 2020, it continues. And there are many examples that show those different practices of solidarity. There are plenty of examples how people live in diaspora, people who had to flee the country, how they continue communicate with those who are inside the country. In Belarus, through different forms of financial support, people from outside the country who are in an easier situation, they look for support, and then they share and support people inside the country. There are plenty of examples. So as for this ethical core of ethos, I think this is still the basis, and this is what our community derives its life from. And I'm speaking here not about diaspora. I am speaking about trans-border community, Belarusians, both inside the country and mainly inside the country, but also the diaspora, because the communication between those two groups exists, and this trans-border mode for the community well, this community is spread all over the world, but people continue to communicate and to help each other. We still have it. But there is also a separate list of difficult questions connected to the community of citizens inside Belarus who have their own issues, their own problems, and their own ideas. It's still a polycentrical community, but they have a particular questions that are different from diaspora. We should acknowledge that the community is similar. There is communication between the community inside Belarus and outside Belarus, but they're still a bit different. So, well, it's a very complicated question, and we need to discuss it maybe separately. I'm not going to go very deep in that because it's really a separate topic for discussion. What else do I want to mention is that this civic and political dimension and solidarity in this dimension that started in 2020. And while we were all more or less in Belarus, everyone symbolic as we were in Belarus, the mass protest was inside Belarus. So we felt the support from diaspora, and so there was a new dimension of help from Belarusians who lived outside Belarus before 2020. They really supported Belarusian protest. That was one situation, one mode of political solidarity. And now we have a slightly different mode after mass emigration. First of all, linked to political reasons, maybe some other reasons. So this is a new dynamics and a new situation. Our community faced a problem of how to construct political life in unique conditions. It's difficult to call it in a different way. I'll call it unique because I cannot think of any similar examples from history of other countries. So I think it's unique by many indicators. I mean, how politically our community developed or how Belarusian society and pro-democratic community developed after mass immigration. This is truly quite a unique situation. And here I should single out separate issues and difficulties for pro-democratic community in exile, because we have to focus on immigration, because the active political life inside the country is impossible. You understand why. Maybe there are underground movements or waves inside Belarus, some smaller communities or discussions with some political topics discussed. Maybe they happen, but they're not public. So if we focus on how political life was built in immigration, we faced how it is possible to, well, the major problem here is how to build political life if there are mass there is a huge number of Belarusian citizens who immigrated and who were ready to participate actively in political and civic life, at least at the beginning. So the question was how to create, how to build this political life of this community in conditions when there is no direct political influence on what happens in the country, in Belarus. So here we see many problems that we should analyze in a separate discussion. I don't understand how I can tell about that right now, because it's a very difficult and very painful problem. We can see that our political life in immigration faces some difficulties. On the one hand, there are evident achievements, there is solidarity, but also there are challenges of political character, and they are linked to how to design authority or political leadership. How it is possible to create political life in conditions of mass political immigration. A new topic for discussion.
Many thanks, dear Tatiana. I have a question. I'll keep this question for the next round. Now I would like to link the things that Tatiana mentioned about conflicts and difficulties that the Belarusian society faces, both the one that is inside the country and transnational diaspora. And so my question to Hanna Komar.
Like one of the part of your research is maybe try answer the question how we can resist. And actually this question I would like to address to you. So what do you think how we can resist all the difficulties of different Belarusian community in Belarus and abroad having, and how we can resist even though we having lots of the misunderstanding, domestic violence, state violence, etc. Maybe any of your thoughts regarding to that?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very good question, considering that actually, and that's the point I forgot to mention in my previous little speech, so I'll probably start with this now, that what I observe in the Belarusian society, there exists the hierarchy of violence. So I remember reading, there have been a number of kind of discussions around several cases of violence against Belarusian women or in Belarusian community. And I remember that someone's comment that basically meaning that if you're a political prisoner, then you're a real victim. And if you're a woman in an abusive relationship, for example, in an abusive marriage, you're not a victim, so you don't really deserve that solidarity and support. Because if you're a political prisoner, you cannot leave the prison. But like many people saying that if you are a woman in an abusive relationship, an abusive marriage in particular, that you can leave, which is a misconception. And that's what I explained. Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why you can't really leave so easily. And actually listening to the stories is one, yeah, about the people's experience from, it is one of the ways how we can understand each other. But also interestingly, what works, the things that work on an individual level, they work at the society level. Let's say for a woman to be able to leave an abusive marriage, she needs a lot of support actually. She needs both emotional, moral support and very often financial support, particularly in Belarus, where women still mostly earn less than men, and they're very often still financially dependent, particularly who live not in Minsk, but like outside in smaller towns and cities. And so what we do, for example, and the same story with the families of political prisoners or the people who are experiencing repressions and living in Belarus. We have funds, right? And charities. And we fundraise and we donate to support those people to keep going. And that helps, right? That's our way to, by supporting them, say financially, we also actually support them emotionally, and we help us as a society, to still kind of stand together and keep resisting. And same, for example, if a woman doesn't have enough means of living to leave the abuser, right? Particularly when she has children. Yeah. What can help is when the close circle, but if there is no close circle, then sometimes it can be different kind of groups, can support emotionally and tell her that she is right in her decision, for example, that this is bad for her, but also support her financially. That's why shelters exist, for example, for women and children victim survivors of domestic violence. And that's why I remember, in Belarus we had Radislava, which was doing that job, and you could also donate and support those women. But families can support. But also we could probably also have those fundraisers to do that. But again, we're going to probably face the problem of the hierarchy of violence. I think what's also important is remember about the agency of people, because, for example, there is this discussion about the women's protest, or there are a number of those discussions, and papers have been published about that. How much agency women who took to the streets in white dresses and later, and with flowers, and then they were taking to the streets to the women's protest a lot. A lot of people question, how useful was that, or how feminist was that protest, and what was their agency, Didn't they come because some women did come with still this traditional view, I'm coming here to protect my children, to defend my children, etc. And yet that was their choice, and that gives them agency, and it's important, right? It doesn't take away the power from them, it gives the power to them. And same with a woman, for example, who decides to to note where probably this example is also can be connected with the people who stay in Belarus and don't leave, don't immigrate, right? Because they are also, I think, there are comments which are pretty upsetting and frustrating that, oh, they're slaves, or like they don't have the willpower, they don't have their decision making, or they're wrong. But they choose to stay, and they have their reasons for that. So in the similar way, a woman who stays on her own kind of choice with the abuser, she makes a choice, and choice is already agency, right? Because she's probably considered her options, and she's decided for a number of reasons. Sometimes leaving is actually puts you even more danger, yeah? Or because you do feel connected with a person and you feel responsible maybe in a way for that person because you've lived for many years, because you do have your children, and because you do care about that person, and you are a human being, and it's just normal to have those human feelings and not to want to abandon someone, yeah, because although that person hurts you, you still feel sympathy, and I think that deserves respect. And I think it's important, at these different levels to remember that people have agency and people make choices, and to respect those choices, because when we criticize that and say that, oh, you're just victims, or your choices are wrong, that we're not going to come to understanding, because it kind of says, oh, I know better for you, I know more than you. Yeah, this is just a few of those examples.
Thank you so much, Hanna. Well, and now I think that also very important to kind of try to analyze how the Belarus is shaped from the international academic perspective, and my next questions will be regarding to that. So my next question will be to Peter, but also if other speakers wanted to add something after Peter, also please go ahead. So the question from our one of our viewers regarding to untold stories about the Belarusian solidarity in terms of events 2020. So Peter, you mentioned how important is to put Belarus on the map, and how important is to for Belarus to be visible in academia. And according to your topics of the research, what do you think? What may be some maybe examples of Belarusian solidarities are still less visible, maybe in your field, or maybe there are again any examples of Belarusian solidarities who is still under research or underviewed by the international scholars, or not only international scholars but local scholars as well. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that question. There's something peculiar going on with the interest for what is happening in Belarus and what has happened in Belarus. I think at a certain point, we saw an increase in interest, especially after the 2020 protests that year, 2020, 2021. There's a clear spike of attention to Belarus across various academic disciplines, from political science to sociology and cultural studies. And scholars who have previously focused, for example, only on Russia or in Ukraine, began to look more seriously at Belarus as a separate case, with its own history and its own politics and its protest movement, obviously, but also its diasporas, its cultural activism. There were more, it's a bit ironic, but there were more Belarusian scholars abroad too, who could help revive and inspire the academic interest. But then it fades quickly away too, the interest, unfortunately. So it's a constant struggle to keep the attention going. In 2022, with the full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine, and the implications of Lukashenko in this whole story created another, I think, wave of interest by scholars interested in geopolitics and in war and regional security, in authoritarian alliances and all of that. And so the political developments really push Belarus onto the academic interest agenda. And also when political developments change, then it seems that interest can go away quite quickly too. So it's very fragile, I think. And it's up to us scholars who want to keep Belarus on the agenda, to keep telling these stories that we are telling, for example, this evening, to a broad audience, and keep reminding them on how important it is, and not let Belarus fade away when the political developments are so overpowering that it fades away from the political news, and that it fades away from the news cycle. Even then, I think it's important to keep the attention going, not only for the people, obviously, of Belarus, for them, but not only for them. It's about showing how this particular case shows us very much about societies, I think, more general. Belarus really can teach us something about how authoritarianism looks like, and how it can reshape itself, how it maybe will look in the future. I think there's a very strong cliche in Western Europe and maybe more global also, that the Belarusian regime is a relic of the past, that it will go away. I think that's a wrong cliche. We've seen it now. It's not a relic of the past. It's a warning for how the future will function, how transactional the future of authoritarianism might be, will be. But it also teaches us a lot about how to continue to resist and keep hope against all odds, and what is needed to keep that hope alive. I think there's a lot to learn from Belarusian pro-democracy activists, how they survive and keep the spirit alive in very harsh circumstances. We need to study that because it is really information that is valuable to a lot of other places in the world too, not only to Belarus. And the themes that come from studying Belarus really extend beyond the case of Belarus, I think. And Hanna gives us a prime example of that. I mean, we can look at it from feminist perspectives, looking at Belarus through the lens of domestic violence. This is something which extends far beyond the Belarusian case, and people will become attentive if they know that it's about that it's about general issues that concern so many of our societies. But in order to keep the attention going, we need to keep telling these broader stories. We need to keep telling those lessons, and it needs a bit of convincing. It needs keeping the attention going in all sorts of way, and we can contribute, I think, from all sides to that. And I know very many people who do continue to contribute to that. So I see it as also my humble task, really, to help supporting them and trying to do something about it. I'm not sure if that directly.
Yeah, but that was very inspirational. Yeah, thank you, Peter.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that was very inspirational. Yeah, thank you, Peter. Well, Tatiana, Hanna, може ви так само хотите щось додати?
Tatiana, Hanna, would you like to add anything from your perspective? In principle, is Belarusian case visible in the academic community? Do you have any ideas on that? And also, more generally about the solidarity and events in 2020, if you want to mention anything else, what topics could be researched about 2020 and solidarity? What other scholars could take up for their research? Please, anyone of you? Tatiana? Yes, I can add a couple of words. again, it's a representation of Belarusian topic. We know that in 2020 and in 2021 there was a spike in interest. There were many scientists who were writing about Belarus in 2021, but already in 2022 they started analyzing the situation in Ukraine. So it became clear that to promote the Belarusian agenda, we need to make some effort. We need to be academically to have this academic solidarity and cooperation with the scholars from other countries. And there are such initiatives that show that still, even now, the analysis of Belarus is widening through conferences, through project activities. Look, for example, ICE is a large congress that is conducted every year in Northern America. 3 last congresses, you could notice that they even increased the number of panels and reports about Belarus. Maybe if you don't know, this is the biggest congress for our region, Eastern Europe, for example. So this is thanks to the way Sasha Razum, Zhenya Mironova, our colleagues who work in the US, how hard they work to promote this topic. Also, there is a network, Belarus, HNet. It's a virtual network where you can promote information about your research. So again, thanks to the initiative of several of our colleagues with support of foreign researchers, Tatiana Ustrovskaya, Tatiana Artemovich, and others, they do this, they promote the topic. Belarus Voices, a book series that is going to be presented and published soon. It is another example. There is a number of new theses of young Belarusian scholars who defended their thesis in European countries, in European universities. This is also promotion of the topic. As for the topics that are interesting, for the polemics, it's interesting to discuss and research the issue of how to promote national culture in the age when we are trans-border community. It's not 19th century any longer. We cannot focus on ethnical nationalism. Now it's a different issue. Another topic could be decolonization, how to talk about decolonization without making it victimization. So to be creative and to be scientific. And other topics, yeah, I have many ideas, but I'll stop here. I saw there was a question to me, if there is time. Yeah, this will be the last question. We'll get back to it. And Hanna, can you add anything? Anything that academicians haven't mentioned yet. Can you do that?
Actually, about the conferences I went to over the past year and a half, let's say, yeah. And of course, I've been to the conference on Belarusian studies in London and the Eastern European and in Israel and Central European studies. And yeah, that I absolutely agree. There is interest to Belarus, and both by Belarus and there are like works by Belarusian researchers, but non-Belarusian researchers too. But I went to the international conference on domestic violence. I went on the conference on gender studies and contemporary women studies. And I was the only Belarusian, obviously. One of them was in the UK in a small university in Cornwall. So it's kind of niche, right? But then the International Conference on Domestic Violence, for example, it's pretty incredible one. There were, I think, over 1,000 participants and like hundreds of speakers. And it would be a great place for us, but it may be, I don't know. But yeah, I was the only Belarusian there, and even my topic was kind of standing out, was not a traditional for there, but there was interest. There was interest to it, which was really great, and the gender studies as well. And what I've been thinking is what we maybe don't pay enough attention to, or don't have space for that yet, is intersectional intersectional kind of academic collaborations with scholars from the global south, for example. Yeah, we focus a lot on the West and on the Western scholars, and that's great, and we receive a lot of support from there, which is incredible. But I think, because there are other, for example, speaking of women's movements, yeah, there have been women movements in Chile, in Pakistan, in India, in a lot of countries, in African countries, and it would be so interesting, because I know there is this paper on comparison of Belarus and Egypt, yeah, the revolutions from the gender perspective. So it would be incredible to have more of that work, because I kind of have a feeling that we avoid, maybe unconsciously, those, or think that we are very different, which is not really true, because it turns out that we're quite similar when it comes to the problems we have, particularly when it comes to gender-based violence. So I think it would be really great to have more of those.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hanna. И у нас литерально
We
8-10 хвилинок до закінчення.
still have 8 to 10 minutes before then, and I would like to finish on a positive note. So whatever we managed to do. And there is a question to Tatiana, but I would like to ask this question to everybody. What makes unique the Belarusian situation in 2020? Tatiana, you can start, and then I will ask the same question to our two other persons. So do we have just 3 minutes? 3 minutes, just by bullet points. It's a challenge.
Thank you for the question. Well, a couple of theses. What else is unique about 2020? The unique is the place that we, the place where female agency appeared. So we are not limiting ourselves about gender roles. We are not speaking about gender equality only, but there is a definitely new positioning of female agency. Well, it was fundamental, and it was revolutionary, because our revolution showed that there is a structural connection, and Hanna mentioned about the structural connection between sovereign violence and patriarchal violence, state violence and domestic violence. So the structural connection of those two dimensions was linked by political sublime. So this is the first point, unique point of 2020. The second is about the rhythm and the length of mass protests that require a lot of patience And here I want to mention Kirschbaum, who really noticed this very important dimension of Belarusian protest. This is a very important topic, and we need to work on it, how to be patient in protest. And the last point, the solidarity in 2020 was built in a way that it wasn't based on any particular political program. Usually there is a number of political programs or parties, and a particular political party wins and they gets the majority. In our case, solidarity was built not around a particular Christian democratic or liberal or any agenda, but it was built around the basic ethical political core. So there was no specific political program, and this makes me put a bridge to what I see now. Our political leaders and pro-democratic community left. They immigrated with this type of solidarity that is not basing on any particular political program. That's why for them, for this political leadership, they had to exist not based on political life principles, because political life is competition, it's a conflict, it's discussion, and in this discussion someone wins and someone gets the majority, and so on. This is political life as it is. This is agony. But our political community, it was structured in a different way. So there is a political community in immigration. So we face a situation that they are the core, they are the basis. All our conflicts, all that we face in the social networks, these are the effects of our political situation. We have leadership that is built not on political principles, but on the principle of getting united around basic core ethical agenda. Today, this political life is like media, so it just pushes itself as or promotes itself as an ethical program, that Belarus needs a state that is based on law and human rights. But at the same time, political life is not present. If political life exists, it's competition. This is the core of our problems. We both, our political structures are at the same time the moral basis, but they have to bear this political role of conflict. There are two ontologies of political life. And in 2020, they became the core, the basis. So there is one ontology of how they promote themselves. And the second ontology is political life and competition. And it's difficult to combine the two. Thank you, Tatiana.
What made, from your perspective, what made the situation in Belarus 2020 so unique?
I saw, aren't we running out of time? No.
Yeah, I mean, I think we like maybe
Peter,
2
maybe
minutes
if you
per
have something.
answer. Yeah, something. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
like
maybe
very briefly, but
I'll try to capture in one slogan, and that is I find the enthusiasm for democracy and freedom and values and dignity that was present in the 2020 protests so important to see, and a lesson to be learned in many other places where these values and ambitions are a bit looked down upon. So it's a reminder of how people can be and still are enthusiastic about those values and aspects and dimensions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. Hanna, maybe the brief last comments from your side.
Yeah, I guess I can see the uniqueness in that some of the issues that we brought up in 2020, we keep bringing them up already, like even in immigration, yeah. And I admire the courage of those people who continue doing that, even though sometimes it seems like those bringing up those issues and resolving them kind of harms the pro-democracy society, but it can't. For example, dealing with gender-based violence, yeah, and with sexism, etc. It cannot harm pro-democracy movement and civic society. It can only strengthen it. And I think that's our takeaway. Yeah, that's what we keep doing from 2020.
Дякую велике, Hanna. Напевно, дякую вам велике усім
Thank you
за
very much for our discussion today. Thank you to our listeners who joined our discussion, and I hope it was interesting to you, as much interesting as it was interesting to me. I would like to sum it up. Of course, we looked at the issues of 2020 from different angles, but they were in harmony. And what Peter mentioned about the regime and how it wanted to use the repressions against musicians and make the Belarusian society totally silent, the music and the whole society also. You mentioned how important it is not to stay silent, how it is important to voice your ideas in the global meaning, and how important it is to understand what is the basis of our actions. This is what Hanna told us. She analyzed how our even intimate relations sometimes can be influenced by ideology. So she analyzed how personal relations can reflect the conflicts in this wider society. And Tatiana also mentioned how important it is to be careful to each other and respect each other and continue doing what we do without losing the hope. That is what everyone mentioned. Thank you very much again for the discussion, and see you again. Thank you.